Hello everyone! Today we're going to look at a couple tips and tricks for how to go about your scale model. I'm going to start out with a tool that you can use, what is called Builder's Square, and we're going to do a very, very simplified version of the Builder's Square. It's going to allow you to make 90-degree angles with ease. Next, we're going to look at how to transfer circles or half circles, how to do that to scale when you're dealing with that specific curve. And last, we're going to look at what do you do if you have multiple scales. So like you have a picture where one view is to a certain scale and the other view is to an entirely different scale. So let's start out with the square. And I've actually already made one. You might look at me and go, Miss Prinz, you've lost your mind. That is definitely not a square. In fact, it is a triangle. That is what I told my building friends when they said, hey, look, use the square. And I searched their box and could not find a square. And then they told me I was an idiot and pulled out a triangle. A triangle! Anyways. That's my little rant. This is in fact a square, and there is a reason why this is a builder's square. What it allows you to do is create square corners. That's where it gets its name, not from its actual shape. And squares are used to find that perfect 90-degree angles, and builders use them for all sorts of things. But we can use a simplified version right now. So let's say that you're building your scale model, and you're starting out with a side, and you have this length already written, and now you're ready to do the next length. What I recommend you do, rather than using a protractor to get that 90-degree angle, is use something that you already know has a 90-degree angle. You want it to be sturdy, so like a note card, or as I did, I just took like the corner of a notebook that I had and I just cut it off. And what you can do is you can line it up with the end and trace along the flat edge. Now you don't need to trace very far because I can always extend this with my straight edge as far as needed. But automatically, because this is 90 degrees and I'm tracing along it, this must also be 90 degrees. So I can get that 90-degree corner pretty much to perfection with just lining this up. And really, like I can get this line started with a pencil, and then I can go back and measure and say I need this to be 4 centimeters. I can then go back, measure through, mark at 4, and erase the remainder of my line. And I can go from there. I could say, okay, well now I need a line that extends back this way. So I can take my square and I can line it up. Now you do have to be careful. Does it line up perfectly? You can't have those gaps, okay? It doesn't need to be perfect in order for this to work, where it's flush against that, flat against it, and then trace out with your pencil or lighter pen and then darken it as needed. So I can measure along this now and get as long as or as far as I need. It can save you a lot of time, and your angles tend to be more accurate. So real builder squares, you can look them up. They're pretty sweet and they can be used for a lot of other things. But you can just make an impromptu one for your drawing if you would like. Now let's go to our second thing, and that is doing circles and half circles. Let's say that you need to transfer over a circle. You're working with a K value of, let's do 1.5. And we're going to start with a half circle. So if I have this half circle and I need to transfer this over, it's hard to transfer over a curve. But straight lines are pretty easy to transfer. So what I'm going to do is on my original, I'm going to kind of like do a dashed line across. And I'm going to find the radius of this circle. Now I can see right now that my diameter is at about 3. And so therefore my radius is going to be 1.5. And that's going to allow me to draw a new radius when I'm doing my transformation. So if I'm going to transfer this half circle or hemisphere over, by the way, you can tell it's a hemisphere. If you go up here, is that still at 1.5 radius? It is. You can see this is cutting it exactly in half. What this is going to let me do is over here, I can multiply it by my K value, which, you know what, I'm actually going to change that to 4 just so we don't have the same values here. So I found my radius 1.5. I'm going to multiply it by my K value of 4, and that is going to give me 6. So my new radius is equal to 6 units. So at this point, I can simply draw in my radius of 6. Pick where you want your center, extend it out, and it's going to be quite tall here. And all I have to do is then line up my protractor so my center is on one of those, and I have a hole at the end of that 6 centimeter line, and I can draw in that half circle. And I'm going to stop there since you won't be able to see the bottom of it anyway. And that will allow me to have that perfect curve using a compass, but not needing to have to like, well, okay, it's this length, this length, this length. It does make it perfect. There's a slight problem though when you have a full circle, and that is it's hard to find what exactly is your radius because unfortunately you can't just like cut across and know that you're at the diameter. But what I tend to do is I try to find the widest part of the circle, and I actually plant my 0 mark at one end, and I go until I can find the furthest number, so as large as it gets to the other, because the diameter is always the longest distance across the circle. And for this one, you can see I use the same radius, so this is actually going to have a center at about here. It doesn't really get much past 3, and it's going to be about 1.5 or 1.55 for my radius. So I can record that, and again, I'd measure it out. I'd multiply that by my K value, give me a radius of 6, and this time I'd go all the way around instead of just partially around. Again, draw out that radius first, and you should be good. Okay, so now we have covered squares. We've covered circles and half circles. There's just one last tip that I want to give you. What do you do when you have multiple scales to work with? A couple of you guys are facing this issue with pictures like this, where you took pictures from a couple different places, which is good, and you have a front view and a side view and all these different views, but if I actually just used a K value of 2 on this front will not fit with this side. These two lengths here and here should be the same length because these buildings, well, this is just 2 views of the same building. It's the same height. So what on earth do I do to transfer over my things when I have 2 different scales? Here's what you do. Pick a K value for your first and probably most difficult one, okay? Do this with the most difficult one. Let's say I do a K value of 2. And find all your links, figure out what your new object is. I've got a length here of 3, and when I transfer it over, then I'll be at 6, so I end up with a length of 6 down here. And of course, I would be all nice and careful because this is my final version rather than just kind of throwing a line down there. Measure across the bottom, so forth and so on. That's 3.1. It becomes 6.2 for my new length. Whew, that's upside down. Okay, so I end up with like this sort of square, and I'm just going to sketch it in. So now that I have my first square, and of course I used my builder square to help make sure that this thing ended up being perfect, which, yeah, I know I didn't, but you guys will be okay. So let's say that this is then my front view. I figured out my front view. I've transferred it over. The problem is my side view, I can't just multiply by 2 because it won't line up with this. So here's what you have to do instead. Find a length that your front has in common with your side and work out your K value from there. So I know that this side length is 6, and let's assume that I've drawn in everything. So I have my doors and windows, and I can tell kind of like where everything is. If the height of this building is 6 centimeters, that means on the side view, this should end up being a 6 centimeter side on my final picture. So this should end up being 6 centimeters. So as I draw in my new view, I can start with that length of 6. Now, though, comes the rougher part, because while I have that part, I don't know what this side will be. So here's where you're going to find K for your new view. And you're going to have to do this with every view that has a different scale from your previous one. So for some of you guys, you might never have to do this. All of your pictures might be to the same scale. For some of you, you might need to do this with each new view. That's okay. It doesn't take that long to set up a K value. If I know that I want this to be 6, but currently it's at a measure of 1.0, looks like 1.6. That means that what I have here is I have 1.6 times K is equal to a measurement of 6. Well, in order to get this new K value for my new scale, I can just divide both sides by 1.6, and that will give me my number to work with. So 6 divided by 1.6 is going to give me a k-value of 3.75. And that means that I can apply that to everything in here. I will multiply each length that I'm looking for, the heights of the windows, the distance between the windows, the length of the building, by 3.75 to get my new side. So this, measuring not in inches of course, but in centimeters, was originally 4.03. So I've got 4.3 times my k-value of 3.75 means that the depth of this building, the length of the side, is 16.125. So that's going to go off of this by a little bit for like my screen here, but I could measure out my 16 and continuing on and on and on until, I have that full length on there. I would end up with then the depth of my building that would actually match my front with that 6 centimeter height. So that's how you can use multiple scales. Don't be afraid to use this. Use one scale that you set for one difficult side and then apply that to find your K value in your future sides. So that is how you can go about multiple scales. And that's it for our tips and tricks for today. Make yourself a builder square. It will save you time. Have a great day.